The real daughter had become lost in the countryside and wasn't found until years later. Upon her return, she learned that her family had already embraced another girl, a charming and lively replacement who had stepped seamlessly into her role in the family. This new girl had fully taken over her place over the past 15 years, leaving the real daughter feeling betrayed and overshadowed. Jealousy consumed her, driving her to devise ways to regain her family's affection. Sadly, her life was cut short when she succumbed to late-stage brain cancer at 23. Only after her death did she come to understand the tragic scope of her life, realizing she had been nothing more than a supporting character in a story. Her life, brief and filled with hardship, had served merely as a tool for others. Then, unexpectedly, she was granted a second chance and found herself reborn at age 17. This time, however, she acquired a unique support system designed specifically for side characters. Glancing at her reflection, she noted the burned scar on her face from her sophomore year of high school. The system materialized before her, informing her that, despite her rebirth, her luck was no better, her future still held the threat of cancer and the danger of car accidents. Puzzled, she inquired about how she could change her luck. The system explained that she could alter her fate by forming connections with people blessed with good fortune, as this would allow her to absorb some of their luck. It presented her with a luck bonsai, explaining that as she accumulated luck, the bonsai would grow blades of grass as a visual marker. She pressed further, asking how many blades of grass were needed to change her destiny. The system replied that she would require approximately 500. Her heart sank, as that seemed like an impossible number. Sensing her distress, the system tried to calm her down, assuring her that it had identified individuals with high levels of luck whom she could approach. When she examined the list, she found several names, though only a few of them promised substantial luck. Among the top names were Fu Yangxi, the eldest grandson of a venerable wealthy family, Fu Zai, the second grandson, and Jiang Qiuxiu, a member of the esteemed Jiang family. Each of them was a well-known figure at school. Feeling a bit down, she noted to herself that all the fortunate people on her list happened to be in the international class. Her spirits lifted as she recalled her recent exam performance. She had placed third in the entire grade, a result that permitted her to change classes at will. Acting swiftly, she filled out a transfer application and anticipated joining the international class by the next day. After completing the application, she began packing her clothes from the suitcase lying open on her floor. Suddenly, there was a sharp knock on her door. Jiao Yuning's urgent whisper followed. He reminded her that Jiao Yuan was being discharged from the hospital that day, asking why she was hiding in her room and urging her to apologize to Jiao Yuan, who was downstairs with the rest of the family. Only a few days before, Jiao Yuan had suffered a severe allergic reaction to peanut butter at He Yang's family store, which led the family to blame her friend, Mingxi, for the incident. Mingxi zipped her suitcase shut and, maintaining a cold expression, opened the door, responding tersely that she saw no reason to apologize for something she hadn't done. Jiao Yuning, catching sight of her suitcase, became visibly distressed, protesting that she was blowing things out of proportion over such a minor incident. Mingxi dismissed his concerns, insisting that it was no trivial matter and demanded he step aside. Taken aback by her uncharacteristically resolute demeanor, Jiao Yuning stepped aside, watching in shock as she carried her suitcase downstairs. The family, assembled to welcome Jiao Yuan back, exchanged uneasy glances upon witnessing her departure. With a sorrowful expression, Jiao Yuan approached Mingxi, grasping her hand and pleading for reconciliation, insisting that she didn't hold Mingxi responsible and urging her to stay. Mingxi, however, shook off her hand, stating firmly that Jiao Yuan was standing in her way. As Mingxi passed, Jiao Xianhuai, observing the scene with frustration, suggested to the family that they should let her go, remarking that if Mingxi wanted to live in the school dorms, there was no point in trying to stop her. Mingxi dragged her suitcase out of the Jiao residence, inhaling deeply as she stepped away from the house. With resolve, she put on a mask, reassuring herself that this time, she still had a chance. Determined not to spend another moment trying to earn the approval of a family that didn't understand her, she felt a renewed confidence. She reminded herself that there was still time to change her life. Meanwhile, a group of students noticed her from a nearby window. Recognizing her, they whispered to each other in surprise, marveling at how she had made it into the top 5 and was likely planning to transfer into the honors class. This class was very different from the international class. While the honors class comprised top students focused on competitions, the international class was known for its relaxed atmosphere and wealthy airs. In her previous life, it had been common knowledge that she had tried transferring to the honors class to be near Shenliao. One of the students, Yi Bo, turned to Shenliao with a teasing smile, suggesting that Jiao Mingxi's hard work to make it into the honors class was solely to be closer to him. Shenliao, however, appeared unfazed, continuing to work on the circuit board of a small robot. He responded indifferently, remarking that as one of the top 5 students in the regular classes, Mingxi had the right to transfer wherever she wished and that her choices had nothing to do with him. As Mingxi walked down the hallway, another student jokingly mentioned that Shenliao might be in for an interesting semester with her around. Amid the noise, the system's familiar voice spoke up, reminding Mingxi that in her previous life, she had been utterly focused on pursuing Shenliao at this point. The system asked her if things would be any different this time. Mingxi responded firmly, assuring that nothing mattered more to her than her own life now. She then asked if those whose luck she absorbed would notice any effect on their fortunes. The system replied by comparing it to the way Wi-Fi hotspots operate, clarifying that when she borrowed good luck, it wouldn't diminish the luck of others. As Jiao Mingxi walked down the hallway, a sudden hush fell over the honors class students. For a moment, Yi Bo and his classmates were stunned, wondering aloud if she had perhaps entered the wrong room since the international class had been further ahead. With an air of quiet determination, Mingxi carried her books to the international class next door. However, as she stepped inside, an all-too-familiar sensation began to wash over her, a sense of dizziness, as if she were treading on clouds, just like she had experienced in her past life. Back then, she'd attributed it to low blood sugar, but this time, a new thought struck her, and she asked herself if it could be a symptom of her terminal illness. Breaking through her anxious thoughts, the system's voice interjected, reminding her of the deliberate setups in her life that served as clues. It explained that individuals with high luck would be marked with an aura, indicating the importance of luck in her journey to change her fate. The system pointed out that the brighter the glow, the higher a person's luck ranking, and ultimately, her destiny could hinge on those specific individuals. Clutching her books tightly, Mingxi noticed a faint green glow appear before her eyes, growing more intense as her gaze landed on a nearby desk. Strangely, no one was sitting there. Exhausted but determined, she headed straight to that spot, set her books down, pulled out the chair, and took her seat. Breathing deeply in the glow-filled area, she detected a faint, herbal aroma that reminded her of fresh pine. The clean, crisp scent seemed to clear her mind, bringing a sense of ease to her discomfort. Suddenly, a tiny, delicate sprout, barely a millimeter in size, pushed its way up from the edge of the potted plant before her. Though minuscule, the sight filled Mingxi with elation, nearly bringing tears to her eyes. She eagerly asked the system about the tiny plant, curious as to why it had appeared so suddenly. The system responded, informing her that this was her first success, hinting at the luck she had just absorbed. In that moment, the whole class fell silent, every eye fixed on Mingxi. A hushed voice broke through the quiet, someone muttering, "Hey, who are you? No one ever sits there." Mingxi glanced to her left and noticed a boy with short red hair, wearing white noise-cancelling headphones, sleeping casually at his desk. She recognized him instantly as Fu Yangxi, the top name on the high-return list. Turning to the student who had addressed her, Mingxi introduced herself, explaining that she was Jiao Mingxi, newly transferred from regular class 6, and asked why she couldn't sit there. The student seemed taken aback and warned her about Fu Yangxi, mentioning that he was a prince of the Fu family, and had a notorious reputation as a school bully. The student implied that anyone who dared sit beside him would likely face threats and end up as his errand runner. To this, Mingxi felt no concern. In fact, she welcomed the idea of running errands for Fu Yangxi, aware that every task she completed could boost her luck value. Ignoring the apprehension of those around her, Mingxi took out a water bottle, stating calmly that there was no other seat available, so she would sit there for now. Her decision left the students around her speechless. The noise surrounding him stirred Fu Yangxi, who removed his headphones, groggily ran his hand through his hair and muttered with cold irritation about the commotion. Then, he reached into his desk drawer, grabbing several bottles, presumably vitamins, and poured a few pills into his hand. Watching him intently, Mingxi seized the opportunity and picked up the water on his desk, handing it to him. Fu Yangxi, still half asleep, accepted it with a hoarse thanks, taking a sip before realizing someone was sitting beside him. His gaze snapped to her, surprise and irritation flashing across his face. He shot up, towering over her, and demanded to know who she was and why she was in the seat beside him. With steady resolve, Mingxi reintroduced herself as Jiao Mingxi, recently transferred from Class 6. The students around Mingxi murmured in astonishment, speculating that Fu Yangxi must have a strong attraction for her, as she was willing to break the rules just to sit beside him. Fu Yangxi seemed to sense their thoughts as well, his expression turning awkward as he stifled a string of curses he had intended to let loose, though his annoyance was still evident. He ordered her to move, grumbling that nobody ever sat next to him. Mingxi, however, didn't intend to make it easy for him. She shifted in her seat, signaling her determination to stay put, clinging to the seat as though her life depended on it. Under her breath, she muttered complaints, only to realize with a jolt that she had said them out loud, causing the entire classroom to fall into a stunned silence. Fu Yangxi's face flushed, his irritation peaking as he demanded an explanation, preparing to have her pack up and leave. Yet, before his threat fully unfolded, the homeroom teacher burst into the room, clutching a stack of newspapers, his expression severe. The teacher's eyes locked onto Fu Yangxi immediately, and he strode over, slamming the newspapers onto the desk with a demand that Fu Yangxi explain himself. The teacher pointed out the school's strict prohibition against riding motorcycles, especially in groups, and chastised Fu Yangxi for disregarding the rule so blatantly. Fu Yangxi only smirked, retorting that newspapers were outdated and questioning why anyone still read them. Incensed, the teacher ordered him to run 30 laps around the field as punishment, threatening to call his parents if he didn't comply. Just as Fu Yangxi prepared to argue back, Mingxi stood up abruptly and offered to run the laps in his place. The international class was left dumbfounded, barely able to process what had just happened. Fu Yangxi, seemingly compelled by the unexpected events, finally turned his attention fully to Mingxi, noticing her slender build, skin as pale as jade, and small hands trembling slightly. Although fear was evident in her expression at the prospect of running 30 laps, she still stood her ground, determined to take on the punishment in his stead. The teacher, clearly exasperated, redirected his anger toward Mingxi and declared that she would not be allowed to return to class until she completed the laps. Accepting the challenge with a quick affirmation, Mingxi dashed out of the room before the teacher could change his mind and further punish Fu Yangxi. She calculated that her effort in running would yield the highest possible return of luck, estimating that by completing the laps, she might earn at least 3 new shoots of luck. Meanwhile, Ku Chengwen, seated in the back row, could barely contain his astonishment as he turned to Fu Yangxi and remarked on the extraordinary sight of a girl willing to run 30 laps for him. Fu Yangxi, though appearing outwardly conflicted, seemed pleased and even proud, acknowledging that, while his charm was undeniable, he couldn't bear the thought of letting Mingxi complete such a daunting task. He muttered that he would find someone to help her. Shortly after, one of the boys caught up to Mingxi, offering to finish the laps for her. However, Mingxi declined, insisting she could manage on her own. The boy, noticing her determination, and the smile that broke across her face at the thought of her reward, was left speechless, pondering aloud whether love really held such power. When the class ended, the entire international class couldn't resist teasing Fu Yangxi. The boy who had approached Mingxi returned to report that she had refused help, her happiness evident as she ran and smiled. This news prompted Fu Yangxi to envision her running with a cheerful expression. Reflecting on her actions, he wondered with satisfaction if she truly liked him that much, privately musing over the irresistible nature of his charm. When Jiang Qiuqiu, at home nursing a cold, overheard the gossip circulating about Fu Yangxi, he couldn't help but laugh, though it set off a series of coughing fits. He decided to call Fu Yangxi to share his skepticism. With teasing laughter, Jiang Qiuqiu questioned Fu Yangxi, expressing doubt about Mingxi's genuine interest. he suggested that perhaps Mingxi only wanted something from Fu Yangxi, sarcastically asking what qualities she might actually admire, whether it was Fu Yangxi's bad temper, his perpetual sulk, his unruly hairstyle, or even his dog-like personality, adding pointedly that maybe she was just after his family's wealth. Fu Yangxi's mood soured instantly, and, visibly irritated, he retorted that if Jiang couldn't speak like a decent person, he should just stay quiet. He then ended the call abruptly, tossing his phone into his desk drawer in frustration. Fu Yangxi mulled over Jiang Qiuqiu's remarks, gradually convincing himself that the transfer student might not genuinely like him after all and might indeed be interested only in his money. Annoyed, he kicked the chair beside him and resolved that he would simply offer Mingxi money when she returned to make her leave him alone. Meanwhile, Mingxi finally completed her grueling 30 laps, exhausted and in desperate need of rest. Rather than returning to class, she headed straight to her dormitory. When she opened her eyes after resting, she was taken aback to find that her potted plant had indeed sprouted 3 fresh shoots, as she had hoped. Startled, Mingxi rushed to the bathroom to check her reflection in the mirror. She was astonished to see that the small mark on her right cheek, which was slightly darker than her fair skin, had faded considerably. It was now almost invisible unless one looked closely. Elated, she realized that staying close to Fu Yangxi and maintaining his favor might help her escape her role as the unfortunate supporting character much faster than she had anticipated. However, as she contemplated her plan, she recognized that Fu Yangxi was tough and challenging to approach, which added a layer of stress. Reflecting on a skill she could leverage, she recalled her cooking talents. Before she had been brought into the Jiao family's care 15 years ago, she had frequently cooked for her grandmother, who had raised her. Even after moving in with the Jiaos, she often tried to win their favor by preparing her best dishes, although her efforts were rarely appreciated by Jiao's mother. Now, Mingxi decided it was time to live for herself, planning to use her culinary skills to foster a closer relationship with Fu Yangxi. Mingxi wondered aloud if cooking for Fu Yangxi might help boost her luck, to which the system eagerly confirmed that any interactions with key characters would indeed increase her luck. Encouraged, she felt a renewed confidence, inwardly vowing that her cooking would surely win him over. She resolved to visit Haiyang's shop after school to gather the ingredients she needed. At lunchtime, in the school cafeteria, Jiao Yuan and her friend Le Xiaoxia had already heard about the events of the morning. Jiao Yuning joined them from the first-year area to have lunch. While they listened to Xiaoxia recount the story, both siblings appeared skeptical, dismissing the idea that Jiao Mingxi could genuinely be interested in someone new. They assumed she was likely just trying to make Shen Liya jealous, as everyone knew how much she liked him. Jiao Yuning, barely touching his food, appeared visibly unimpressed with the cafeteria meal. Jiao Yuan, noticing his lack of appetite, offered him some meat from her own plate. Sighing, she remarked that Mingxi's action seemed childish and impulsive, and leaving home to stay at school had been a hasty decision. She then asked Yuning if he knew when Mingxi planned to return. Annoyed, Jiao Yuning responded dismissively, stating that Mingxi had pulled stunts like this numerous times in the past and always came back on her own. Jiao Yuan, attempting to ease his irritation, suggested he speak to her, reminding him that he was the one closest to her. She added that if this approach failed, they could reassure her that her actions regarding the allergy incident weren't entirely her fault once she returned. Still irritated, Jiao Yuning refused the idea, insisting that he wouldn't reach out this time and advising Jiao Yuan not to either. He explained that he'd checked her closet the previous night and noted that most of the clothes their mother had bought her remained, which to him suggested she didn't plan on staying away for long. Confident in his assessment, he predicted that she would return on her own within a few days. Although Jiao Yuning had downplayed the situation, he still felt irritated by the lackluster cafeteria food, especially since he used to rely on the lunches Mingxi brought from home. Regardless of how tense things became between them, she had never failed to bring lunch before. But today, she was absent and refused his call, leaving him to wonder where she had gone. Meanwhile, Xiaoxia, seated nearby, couldn't help but laugh as she remarked that the rumor about Mingxi's running in circles strategy had reached their class, claiming Mingxi was just trying to make Shen Liya jealous. She added dismissively that, given how many girls liked him, Mingxi didn't stand a chance unless she looked as exceptional as the girl beside her. Unable to restrain himself any longer, Jiao Yuning stood up, pointed at Xiaoxia, and sharply retorted, demanding she reflect on herself before criticizing others. Startled by his outburst, Xiaoxia quickly apologized, realizing she had crossed a line. Jiao Yuan stepped in to ease the tension, advising Xiaoxia to be more considerate before they resumed their meal. Yet, Jiao Yuan couldn't stop her mind from drifting to Jiao Mingxi's appearance. She remembered how Mingxi's beauty had captivated their entire family when she first came to live with them 2 years prior. Her striking, bold features had even outshone Jiao Yuan's own softer, more gentle beauty. Though Jiao Yuan's feelings of insecurity had faded after an accident left Mingxi with a scar a year ago, a sense of unease lingered in her thoughts. Jiao Yuan's reflections were interrupted by Jiao Yuning's voice suddenly uttering Mingxi's name. Both Jiao Yuan and Xiaoxia turned to see Mingxi entering the cafeteria, her face partly concealed by a disposable mask. Jiao Yuning assumed she must have been delayed due to the morning's lapse, which explained why she hadn't made it to lunch earlier. Jiao Yuning observed that Mingxi hadn't brought a lunchbox, an unusual break from her usual habit, especially following an argument. This realization made him feel a bit low, prompting him to consider apologizing first. He recalled the harsh words he'd spoken when she left home the previous day, making him hesitate as she approached. However, as Jiao Yuning finally mustered the courage to call out to her, Mingxi walked right past him without acknowledging his greeting. Shocked and feeling somewhat slighted, he wondered if she had intentionally ignored him. Watching her collect her lunch, their eyes briefly met, but she quickly averted her gaze and went to sit alone in another part of the cafeteria. Soon, He Yang joined Mingxi with her own meal, adding a small dessert from her family's shop. She commented that her father couldn't stop talking about the dessert Mingxi had made last weekend, offering her one to try. Mingxi's excitement grew, yet she decided to save it for later, back in the classroom. He Yang teased her for her frugality, though Mingxi's thoughts drifted to whether sharing the dessert with Fu Yangxi might catch his attention. Shifting the conversation, He Yang casually asked if Jiao Yuan's allergy had improved, which brought Mingxi back to the present. Mingxi explained she didn't know because she had recently moved out of the family home to live in the school dorm. Surprised, He Yang jumped to his feet, expressing disbelief that Mingxi had been made to leave over Jiao Yuan's allergy, questioning the family's treatment of her. Mingxi quickly clarified, urging her friend to keep her voice down, and insisted it was her own decision to move out. He Yang appeared visibly outraged, declaring her suspicion that Jiao Yuan might have orchestrated the situation. She wouldn't be surprised, He Yang claimed, if Jiao Yuan had staged the entire episode. Mingxi let out a sigh, acknowledging it was possible, and added that Jiao Yuan's close friend, Xiaoxia, likely played a role as well. Upon hearing this, He Yang's expression turned even more intense. She exclaimed that Xiaoxia, who had been infatuated with Shen Liao since the beginning, often looked at Mingxi as if she were an adversary. Mingxi clarified that her thoughts were only speculative, mentioning there was nothing unusual in the security footage that could confirm any wrongdoing. Nevertheless, He Yang, still seething, voiced her certainty that Xiaoxia was involved, citing jealousy over Mingxi's family's marriage arrangement with Shen Liao. She suggested that Mingxi should try to explain the matter to her family. Mingxi, however, only managed a sardonic smile, explaining that any attempt to clarify her position would likely be futile. Since the incident took place at He Yang's family's shop, it would appear suspicious, as though she had deliberately staged it. Disheartened, He Yang admitted her frustration, promising not to let the issue rest and vowing to uncover the truth about whoever had been causing trouble. Seeing her friend's reaction, Mingxi began to regret sharing so much. She tried to lighten the mood, giving He Yang's cheek a light pinch and suggesting they move on. Mingxi declared she was done with the Jiao family and shifted the conversation to her need for ways to earn money. In response, He Yang's face brightened, and she pulled out her phone, eager to share a few job leads. She listed several options: writing essays, playing piano gigs, even taking exams on behalf of others. Intrigued, Mingxi inquired about the exam-taking job and its pay. He Yang nodded, explaining that a wealthy student had recently offered 8,000 yuan for a substitute to sit in for a test, claiming he was too unwell to attend himself. Mingxi's eyes widened at the amount, realizing it was enough to cover an entire semester's expenses. As she looked at the account that posted the job, Handsome Edge, she noted that the name seemed familiar, although she couldn't immediately recall why. Despite being enticed by the prospect of earning money, Mingxi admitted to herself that her recent streak of bad luck with tests made the opportunity unwise. She resolved to wait until her fortunes improve before taking on anything risky. After lunch, Mingxi and He Yang exited the cafeteria, unaware that a group of Shen Liao's friends, who had been sitting nearby, overheard parts of their conversation. Yi Bo, one of Shen Liao's friends, had caught enough details to conclude that Jiao Yuan's allergic reaction had likely resulted in Mingxi moving out. Watching Mingxi leave, he felt his curiosity growing and threw a look toward Shen Liao, his eyes bright with intrigue. Yi Bo leaned in closer to Shen Liao and murmured that Mingxi's transfer to the international class, along with her bold claim about pursuing Fu Yangxi, now made sense. Smirking, he then suggested that perhaps Mingxi's jealousy of Xiaoxia had been a factor. Shen Liao responded with a look of mild irritation, dismissively asking who Xiaoxia even was. Continuing, Yi Bo reminded him that Xiaoxia was the girl who had handed him a water bottle the previous Friday after their second basketball game, while Mingxi had watched from the sidelines, appearing visibly irritated. Shen Liao seemed to put the pieces together, realizing that Mingxi likely hadn't seen him toss the water bottle aside afterward. Yi Bo speculated that Mingxi's subsequent clash with Jiao Yuan over the weekend might have driven her to switch classes. Convinced of his theory, Shen Liao nodded in agreement with Yi Bo's conclusion. Meanwhile, Mingxi entered the international class next door after the lunch break. The room, chilled by the hum of the air conditioning, was abuzz with attention as she walked in. She felt the weight of 40 pairs of eyes on her, scrutinizing her every move. Her anxiety lifted only when she noticed her books still neatly stacked on the desk beside Fu Yangxi's seat, untouched and reassuringly free from the trash bin. Mingxi forced herself to remain calm as she approached Fu Yangxi, noting how the dry, pine-like scent around him felt surprisingly refreshing, clearing her mind almost instantly. Fu Yangxi, with his trademark messy red hair and large silver headphones resting around his neck, shot her a cool, indifferent look. But as she got closer, she noticed his demeanor beginning to shift. Though his gaze was sharp and carried an air of confidence, his ears betrayed him, flushing a subtle shade of red. Irritated, Fu Yangxi asked her what she wanted, his tone tinged with annoyance. He reminded her that he had allowed her to sit next to him that morning only because she had run 30 laps on his behalf. He warned her, however, not to get any ideas, emphasizing that he wasn't comfortable with her sitting beside him as a permanent arrangement. In response, Mingxi tried to stay composed, pointing out that there were no other seats available. Fu Yangxi merely scoffed, remarking that it wasn't his responsibility to resolve her seating dilemma. At that moment, Ku Chengguen, a classmate known for his teasing remarks, joined in, quipping that Mingxi didn't need to sit so close to Fu Yangxi, playfully suggesting that since she had transferred to his class, she had plenty of time to cozy up to him later. As he made his comment, 2 other boys came over, prepared to move Mingxi's desk. Realizing she would lose her chance to remain near Fu Yangxi's refreshing presence, Mingxi reacted quickly, gripping the desk tightly and declaring her intention to stay. When the boys continued attempting to move her desk, she went further, draping half of her body across it in defiance. The boldness of her move left everyone around her momentarily stunned. Fu Yangxi gave her a fierce look, but Mingxi held her ground, quickly straightening up and offering 2 dessert squares as a trade, suggesting that in exchange for the treats, he would allow her to remain seated beside him. Fu Yangxi eyed the desserts with a feigned lack of interest, dismissing them by saying he wouldn't care for anything she made. However, he couldn't ignore the sweet, fluffy aroma that suggested they would taste amazing. Acknowledging her effort, he conceded to himself that it was thoughtful of her to remember his fondness for sweets, a definite improvement over the usual attempts others made to get his attention. Before he realized, a grin slipped onto his face as he mused that perhaps she wasn't pursuing him merely for his wealth. Noticing this, his friend Ku Chengguen tried to sneak a look at the desserts, but Fu Yangxi pushed his head away and, with a haughty expression, announced his acceptance of the treats. Then, in an exaggerated tone, he told Mingxi that he would allow her to stay beside him for the rest of the day but insisted she find another seating arrangement by tomorrow, as he didn't want her nearby permanently. Unfazed, Mingxi raised 2 more desserts and made a bold offer, 2 additional treats for the day, plus his WeChat contact. Her proposal stunned the class, who gasped at her audacity. No one had ever asked Fu Yangxi for his contact in front of others before. Startled, Fu Yangxi almost choked, his face growing red as he warned her not to use it to bother him. Mingxi only grinned, unfazed by his reaction, and suggested humorously that he give her half his contact now, leaving the other half for another time in exchange for a future favor. Both flustered and intrigued, Fu Yangxi finally allowed her to scan his WeChat, all while noticing her self-satisfied expression. Rolling his eyes, he then took out a bank card and placed it on her desk, stating it was her payment for running the laps earlier. Mingxi accepted it without hesitation, reasoning that accepting wouldn't hurt, though she secretly planned to save it up to treat him in return someday. Fu Yangxi rested his chin on his hand with a self-assured smirk, observing Mingxi's reaction. He commented, in a manner he found endearingly cocky, that he simply couldn't help being so charming, wealthy, and undeniably attractive. His phone buzzed just then, interrupting his musings. It was Jiao checking in to see if he had handed Mingxi the money yet. Fu Yangxi confirmed, typing that he had sent her 100,000 yuan and confidently adding that he could tell she genuinely liked him, and that her interest wasn't just about his wealth. After hitting send, Fu Yangxi let his gaze drift back to Mingxi, who had slipped off her school jacket. Her black hair cascaded over her pale neck, highlighted by her plain white t-shirt, reminding him of a graceful swan. Even though he wasn't entirely convinced of her feelings, he kept up his show of bravado in front of his friend. Almost immediately, Jiao replied with a note of skepticism, warning him not to be so sure, as it might take time to understand her intentions. The comment was accompanied by a jab, as Jiang remarked he hadn't seen anyone actually like Fu Yangxi purely for who he was. That struck a nerve, and Fu Yangxi felt a pang of irritation, dismissing it as jealousy over the positive attention he was getting. Later, Fu Yangxi dozed off in class, which allowed Mingxi ample opportunity to observe him quietly. When he eventually awoke, stretching and yawning, he noticed that class had ended and his habitual glance towards Mingxi's seat revealed it was now empty. He frowned, musing with some irritation that her disappearing acts weren't exactly helping her pursuit of him. Just then, his phone buzzed again, and he checked it idly. To his surprise, a stream of notifications about transactions popped up, one for 12,000 yuan, another for 23,000, and a third for 21,000. His expression soured upon realizing she had spent a total of 56,000 yuan. Feeling a sting of disappointment, he wondered bitterly if her interest had indeed been less genuine than he thought. Fu Yangxi lay stretched across his velvet-covered bed, his wet red hair plastered to his forehead, glaring at his phone with an icy expression. It had been 2 hours since he'd received the last notification message, and he found himself grumbling over the rapid expenditure of tens of thousands of yuan. Fu Yangxi thought with irritation that the transfer student had burned through the money swiftly, and while he didn't care much about the financial aspect, her complete lack of restraint bothered him. As the minutes ticked by, he grew increasingly agitated, his gaze shifting between his phone and the clock. Rubbing his tired eyes, he checked the time again. It was already 11:10 p.m., and he muttered to himself, wondering what was keeping her from responding. Reflecting on his efforts to connect with her on WeChat, Fu Yangxi thought it was irritating that Mingxi hadn't even bothered to message him after spending his money. He sneered inwardly, noting that even gold diggers would at least say thank you once they had cashed in, and mused that it wasn't asking too much for her to put in a little effort to try winning him over. Just then, his phone buzzed. He checked it eagerly, only to smack himself in the face as he sprang up too quickly. Meanwhile, in her dorm, Mingxi leaned back on her bed, indifferent to whether or not he'd reply, as she typed a message saying, "Just go ahead and block notification for me." Smiling slightly, she turned her attention to a small potted plant nearby, her eyes lighting up when she saw a tiny green sprout appear, likely in response to the message. Since he didn't respond, she sent him another message saying, "Good night," and, delightedly, noticed another smaller sprout. Mingxi remembered reading about diminishing returns, and thought this was why her many messages earlier hadn't produced much of a reaction from him. Curious about whether her message length would make any difference, Mingxi inquired, to which the system gave a non-committal answer, suggesting she try it out for herself. Taking this as an invitation, she quickly typed a long, nonsensical message filled with random phrases like, Astafulk the card loves arrow adjtva adflage go forward blah blah blah, and sent it off. As anticipated, a tiny new sprout appeared, though it was smaller than the last one, making it clear that this plant was strict about its diminishing returns. After various attempts, Mingxi eventually concluded that neither the length, frequency, nor actual content of her messages seemed to impact the sprout's growth significantly. Instead, it seemed she only needed to send Fuyangxi 3 messages daily, and that alone would suffice. Satisfied upon seeing another little sprout emerge, Mingxi happily lay back, deciding she had no need to return home, where she'd merely be met with the same troubles as before. Just then, her phone chimed with a message from He Yang, stating that Shen Liao was going to her home tonight. Mingxi paused, slightly taken aback, since when did he start acting so bold? Meanwhile, back at the Jiao residence, Mrs. Jiao had already been frowning earlier when she'd asked their driver if Mingxi planned to stay away indefinitely. In response, the driver suggested he could go to her school the next day to bring her back, but Mrs. Jiao, irritated, declined the offer, remarking that Mingxi's departure over a few words she had spoken was nothing more than bratty behavior and that she wasn't going to indulge it. The driver refrained from commenting further, recognizing it was a family issue best left alone. As Mrs. Jiao remembered her less than satisfying meal, she couldn't help but notice something missing, the homemade sweet and sour ribs that Mingxi typically prepared. The house felt unusually quiet without Mingxi's familiar presence, and even Jiao Yuning had left his meal untouched, retreating to his room to play games instead. Unable to ignore the silence, Mrs. Jiao eventually went upstairs and knocked on Jiao Yuning's door. She asked him if he had seen Mingxi at school or knew when she might end what she considered a tantrum and return home. Jiao Yuning, however, had little patience for her line of questioning. He bluntly reminded her that he was a 10th grader and had no reason to be in the seniors area at school, then added that perhaps the responsibility lay with her, as she had angered Mingxi enough to make her leave. Stunned into silence, Mrs. Jiao left without a retort. As the sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway, Jiao Yuning, having shut off his game, picked up his phone to open WeChat, trying to make sense of his sister's anger. He recalled how Mingxi had ignored him at lunch, treating him like a stranger. He wondered if she was serious about her apparent decision to sever ties with the family altogether, lamenting the potential loss of her homemade lunches and companionship. After struggling with his words, repeatedly typing and deleting messages, Jiao Yuning finally settled on one, "What, are you cursing me or something, Jiao Mingxi?" Although he felt exasperated at always being the one to reach out first, he still hoped for her response. But to his surprise, he was greeted with a red exclamation mark and the notification, "You are not friends with this user. Send a friend request to connect." In complete shock, Jiao Yuning instinctively dialed Mingxi's number, only to be met with an automated voice informing him that her line was unavailable. It slowly dawned on him that she had not only blocked him on WeChat but on her phone as well. Just as he tried to process this revelation, a knock came at his door. The servant informed him that Shen Liao was waiting downstairs on Madame Jiao's request, a surprise for Jiao Yuning since it was uncharacteristic of Shen Liao to visit the Jiao household without invitation. Though he was still frustrated by his sister's actions, Jiao Yuning forced himself to head down to the living room. Upon entering, he overheard Shen Liao explaining to his mother that Jiao Mingxi had no involvement in Jiao Yuan's allergy incident. Both Jiao Yuning and his mother appeared equally stunned by this sudden clarification. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Mingxi was roused from sleep by a call from her eldest brother, Jiao Jianhuai. He acknowledged that they had all misjudged her and suggested that running away was an overreaction. He tried to persuade her to come home, even offering to pick her up himself. Mingxi ended the call without responding, and when Jiao Jianhuai followed up with a text about her defiance, she promptly blocked him as well. For Mingxi, the resulting silence was a rare relief. At the Jiao home, Jiao Jianhuai waited anxiously for a response that never came. As he glanced at his mother, he noted the slight but visible guilt on her face. Trying to justify the delay, Jiao Yuning remarked that Mingxi was likely asleep by now, given that it was already past 10 o'clock. Jiao Yuning's mother, though showing signs of remorse, still couldn't help but defend her stance, remarking that no one had blamed Mingxi that harshly. She admitted that while Jiao Yuan's allergy incident wasn't Mingxi's fault, Mingxi hadn't needed to react so dramatically, ignoring Jiao Yuan's health in the process. Jiao Yuning, observing the conflict of regret and irritation on his mother's face, began to comprehend the situation from a new angle. He questioned why the family had been so eager to blame Mingxi despite Shen Liao's recent clarification that she wasn't at fault. His mother's response seemed to reveal a lingering criticism, as though Mingxi had been irresponsible. Jiao Yuning, for the first time, felt the weight of familial bias, realizing how Mingxi might have experienced feeling blamed and overlooked while the family consistently favored Jiao Yuan. The following morning, as Mingxi prepared for her day, she sent a single-period text to Fu Yangxi. As she sat down to breakfast, she noted that he hadn't responded yet, confirming her suspicion that he might have blocked her. The system let her know that she just needed to send the message without actually reading it, which made her super happy. This gave her the freedom to text him without any expectation of a reply. Grinning to herself, she sent 2 more single-period messages, satisfying her personal goal of 3 texts a day. Fu Yangxi had spent a sleepless night, anxiously waiting for any sign of a message from Mingxi. When 3 messages finally came in, each containing nothing more than a single dot, he stared at his phone, baffled. He wondered if he was missing some hidden meaning in these mysterious dots, pondering if it was a trend he simply didn't understand. Curiosity finally overtook him, and he opened his browser to search for answers. Typing in, "What do 3 dots mean?" he came across a response explaining that in romantic novels, 3 dots symbolized a secret message, essentially, "I miss you, I love you." According to the answer, it was a discreet expression of affection, often used between lovers. Reading this, Fu Yangxi shook his head in disbelief, amused at the thought. He murmured to himself that Mingxi really knew how to convey her feelings in her own way. Meanwhile, Mingxi arrived in her classroom, the international class, only to be greeted with an unexpected sight. Her desk, along with all her textbooks, had been moved to the back row. Shocked, she muttered to herself, incredulous that Fu Yangxi would actually go through with such a petty move, especially since she'd even brought cake for him that day. She had assumed he was joking when he had declared, "One dessert buys you 1 afternoon of sitting next to me," but here she was, banished to the back. Just then, Ku Chengguen strolled into the classroom, visibly tired and yawning. He informed Mingxi that since Fu Yangxi frequently arrived late and left early, he hadn't bothered moving her things himself but had instead tasked the rest of the students with the job. As he glanced at the cake box she was holding, his expression brightened. He suggested a deal, asking if she would give him the cake in exchange for covering her cleaning duties for the entire semester. Already having eaten breakfast and now in no mood to give Fu Yangxi anything after being so unceremoniously relocated, she readily agreed, handing him the cake and instructing him to start with the blackboard. With the cake secured, Ku Qingwen's regard for Mingxi took a noticeable leap. He offered, with a hint of enthusiasm, that if she brought another one the following day, he'd even slip her Fu Yangxi's home address, hinting that it might help her earn a few more points with him. Mingxi brushed off the suggestion, laughing as she declined, remarking that knowing Fu Yangxi's address wouldn't mean she'd be welcome there. Smiling, she waved Ku Chengguen away before making her way to her newly assigned seat at the back. Observing this, Ku Chengguen found himself stunned, wondering if Mingxi was truly giving up on her pursuit of Fu Yangxi so quickly. After all, being his desk mate had proven to be more troublesome than she'd anticipated, with Fu Yangxi's unpredictable moods and intense personality constantly keeping her on edge. Weighing her options, she briefly considered whether sitting next to someone less lucky but less dramatic, like Jiang Qiuxiu, would be easier, especially since he seemed to be a more peaceful option, even though he was currently out sick. Just then, Fu Yangxi entered the classroom, looking as though he hadn't slept at all. Earbuds hung loosely around his neck, his hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and his half-awake, slightly disheveled expression gave him a more intense appearance than usual. His typically spiky red hair was flatter than normal, accentuating his fair skin and sharp features. Ordinarily, Fu Yangxi would head straight to his desk to collapse in a nap. Yet today, his gaze wandered over to the far corner of the last row, where Mingxi was quietly seated, her head lowered. Her school uniform caught the morning light, casting a gentle glow over her. Though Fu Yangshi rarely thought of his classmates in terms of gender, it struck him for the first time that girls did indeed seem smaller and more delicate than boys. He briefly speculated if Mingxi's slim frame was due to not eating much and wondered, almost as an afterthought, if she might be struggling financially. However, he quickly dismissed this line of thinking, turning his attention back to his own desk with a decidedly irritated expression. As Fu Yangshi made his way to his desk, he spotted Ku Chengwen half hidden underneath, seemingly engrossed in something. Fu Yangshi, with a suspicious tone, inquired about what Ku Chengwen was eating. The question caused Ku Chengwen to flinch, instinctively lowering his head even further. Then Fu Yangshi noticed the dessert, the very same one Mingxi had brought to class earlier. His face darkened, feeling a sense of betrayal. He thought, wasn't she supposed to be giving that dessert to him? Even if she was only motivated by money, switching her attention to another target so suddenly seemed completely unreasonable. He found it hard to believe that, after her mysterious demeanor that morning, she had simply handed the dessert to someone else. It left him feeling frustrated, as if she were opportunistically shifting focus for the next best deal. Irritated, Fu Yangshi felt his newfound warmth towards her quickly fading. Without hesitation, he grabbed Ku Chengwen by the shirt, demanding to know how much he had paid Mingxi. Ku Chengwen nodded a bit sheepishly, explaining that he had merely asked if she wanted Fu Yangshi's address, though she had declined. Fu Yangshi felt as though he had been deceived and, thoroughly agitated, he put on his noise-cancelling headphones, kicked his chair back with a huff, and dropped into his seat, simmering in frustration. However, he soon felt his foot hit something underneath the desk. Looking down, he spotted a box and snapped at Ku Chengwen, asking if it belonged to him. Ku Chengwen quickly denied it, mentioning that Mingxi had brought it in earlier that morning. Sensing Fu Yangshi's irritation, Ku Chengwen attempted to lighten the mood by suggesting that it might be a present for him, adding that he wouldn't get his hopes up about its contents. When they opened the box, they found a collection of vitamins. Fu Yangshi cast Ku Chengwen a cold glare, though his gaze then shifted back to the other items inside. Alongside the vitamins, he saw a high-end ergonomic chair, a Pikachu pillow, lavender-scented items, and even a few bottles of eye drops neatly arranged in the corner. Fu Yangshi was momentarily stunned, blinking in surprise. He hadn't expected that such an expensive ergonomic chair, along with the other carefully chosen items, had been arranged with him in mind. His previously stormy expression softened, though he tried to mask his genuine surprise and curiosity. Murmuring to himself, he wondered aloud what kind of cute stuff this could be, coughing slightly to cover his reaction. Meanwhile, Ku Chengwen, grinning, began sorting through the items with obvious enthusiasm. When he offered to test the new chair for Fu Yangshi, jokingly calling out, "Let me test it for you, Yangshi Ji." Fu Yangshi wasted no time in grabbing him by the collar, shoving him aside with an indignant huff and telling him to get lost. Settling into the chair, Fu Yangshi found himself slightly underwhelmed by its comfort, though he reassured himself that it must be good, simply because she had chosen it. This small thought, the realization that no one had ever been so thoughtful toward him before, helped him finally let go of his earlier frustration over Mingxi's betrayal with the dessert. Actually, he admitted to himself, he had no problem sitting next to her now. Elsewhere, Mingxi was in a cheerful mood, asking her system about the potted plant on her desk. She inquired about how many sprouts she might be able to grow from it, to which the system optimistically replied, up to 999 sprouts. Her excitement almost turned to disbelief before the system clarified, explaining that if she managed to grow just 500 sprouts, her fate as a villain would be cleared, and with more effort, she might even be able to turn her luck around. Hearing this, Mingxi felt even more motivated, already planning new ways to earn more fortune points. Meanwhile, at that very moment, Fu Yangshi, often regarded as the school's untouchable crown prince, found his thoughts drifting to Mingxi. Despite never caring much about other people's friends or interests before, he spent the entire class period wondering about her, curious about who she really was and what she liked. For a brief moment, he even felt a slight pang of regret for having pushed the owner of the thoughtful gifts to the back row of the classroom, away from him. Lost in thought, Fu Yangxi shot a quick glance at Mingxi, glaring at her throughout the morning as he silently anticipated her return, half expecting she'd ask to move her desk closer to his. The entire international class was taken aback. For the first time in 3 years, Fu Yangxi managed to stay awake for the entire first period, a rare sight that didn't go unnoticed. However, as lunchtime arrived and Mingxi's desk remained in its distant corner, Fu Yangxi realized she was missing. Feeling an unexpected sense of irritability and a twinge of being left out, he pulled off his headphones, muttering to Ku Chengwen to find out where she had gone. In response, Ku Chengwen casually mentioned that she was likely with her friends from the regular class. This news only fueled Fu Yangxi's curiosity further. Running a hand through his unruly red hair, he leaned against the wall and, with an almost reluctant tone, asked Ku Chengwen to gather some information about her, details about her past friends and anything she might be interested in, as well as every possible detail he could uncover. Ku Chengwen was startled by this unexpected request, reflecting that in the 3 years he'd known Yangxi, he had never seen him show interest in anyone, least of all a girl. With a hint of intrigue, Ku Chengwen leaned closer and asked, almost in disbelief, if Yangxi might actually like her. To this, Fu Yangxi smacked Ku Chengwen on the head with a mix of irritation and amusement, sarcastically replying that his so-called interest was merely suspicion. He jokingly speculated that Mingxi could be spying on him, poised to use any slip-up to gather secrets or maybe even steal his assets. Ku Chengwen reluctantly considered this possibility and agreed, resolving to follow up on Yangxi's request. Just as Ku Chengwen was about to walk away, he couldn't help but point out that Fu Yangxi's book was upside down. Flustered, Fu Yangxi tossed the book at his head, telling Ku Chengwen to leave him alone. Meanwhile, Mingxi approached He Yang's classroom. This time, she was determined to avoid any conflict with Shen Liao, so instead of handing over the notes directly, she decided on a more discreet approach. She texted He Yang, politely asking for a favor, and slipped a small thank you note between the pages of the notebook before stepping away. Mingxi reconsidered her actions, feeling that leaving a note seemed overly eager, it might give the impression she was trying too hard. She wondered if Shen Liao might have only lent her the notes casually, without much thought. Deciding against the gesture, she crumpled the paper and discarded it, firmly determined to avoid making that mistake again. When lunch break arrived, Shen Liao remained engrossed at his desk, his focus absorbed in a circuit board project. Yi Bo approached, suggesting they head out for lunch, but Shen Liao merely glanced up briefly and told him to go ahead. Yi Bo shrugged and left, only to catch sight of He Yang making her way over with a notebook in hand. She placed it on Shen Liao's desk, without a word, and turned to leave. Shen Liao's expression shifted slightly as he asked why she was the one returning it. Without turning, He Yang explained that Mingxi had finished using the notes and had requested her to bring them back. She then asked if there was a problem. Slightly frowning, Shen Liao found himself caught off guard. Mingxi had never asked anyone else to return items for him before. He couldn't help but wonder what had changed this time.